Hi, Nutrition 111 students, let's take a look at Chapter 8. So, share screen, and here we go. So Chapter 8 is an overview of micronutrients and phytochemicals. This is a place in these chapters to come where we really see how your textbook authors use the functional approach. When we look at these micronutrients, and remember, micronutrients means that we only need a tiny bit of that particular nutrient, micrograms or milligrams, tiny amounts. When we look at these micronutrients, we will study them in relationship to one of their major functions. But as we're looking at these functions of micronutrients, we can clearly see that there's crossover, right? So vitamin C is important for body defenses. Vitamin C is also important for bone health. We see that vitamin C is also important for brain health. So although we'll study it in one chapter that covers one function, there's a lot of crossover. So starting with vitamins, vitamins are carbon-containing substances. They are essential. The body cannot make them at all or cannot make them in sufficient quantities for health, and absence leads to deficiency symptoms and can be reversed by that vitamin. Now, keep in mind, the upper levels that we talked about all the way back in Unit 1 are very important here, because when you exceed the upper level, that's the point at which toxicity concerns come about, and that is considered a megadose. Okay, so avoid intakes in excess of the upper levels. And it is important to note, because often we say natural sources versus fortified food. It's the same chemical compound. And for most of these vitamins, works equally well. There's one exception that really stands out in my mind, which we'll get to in the next unit. So we categorize them in terms of whether they're fat soluble or water soluble, and that ends up telling us a lot about those vitamins. Fat soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K, and the water soluble are all of the B's and vitamin C. Fat soluble need to travel with fat, so they're absorbed with fat. Okay, they're absorbed better when you have some fat in your food. They are transported around the body with fat as well, and they're stored with fat. So we see here that anything that interferes with fat absorption will also impair fat-soluble vitamin absorption. Cystic fibrosis is a disease that does just that. The weight loss drug Orlistat is a medication that blocks some fat absorption, so that would also lead to malabsorption of fat-soluble vitamins, as does mineral oil. The water soluble are primarily absorbed in the small intestine. They have a pretty high bioavailability. They go to the liver, and then they're distributed around to our body tissues. Now, we talked about this a bit already, that the fat soluble vitamins are stored, A, D, E, and not K. A, D, and E in particular are not readily excreted from the body, so they can accumulate it. The vitamin that is most likely to reach those UL or toxic levels is vitamin A. That has, we discussed a margin of safety between your recommendation, the RDA, and the UL. Vitamin A has the most narrow margin of safety. And still, for most people, that UL, the problem high level, is reached by supplements and not foods. Water-soluble vitamins, for the most part, are excreted. These are a few exceptions that are stored in the liver. I wanted to mention that B6 is stored also in the muscles, and primarily in the muscles. And it's interesting, we don't have a UL for B12, but we do for B6. It's very, very high and impossible to reach from foods. But if you do mess around with inappropriate doses of this vitamin in supplement form, you can actually end up with damage to your nerves. Okay, so this was a pretty earth-shattering finding when we found this, because in the past we thought that water-soluble vitamins couldn't possibly hurt us. They'd all end up in the urine. But for B6 and B12, that's not the case. Now, I do want to underscore B12 doesn't have a UL. It seems quite safe, but B6 does. Okay, again, avoid megadoses from supplements. Problems as far as toxicity are almost entirely from supplements. Fortified foods can help tip the scale. Regular foods typically not, with one exception being liver for vitamin A, but you would have to consume a lot of liver. So you'll see these types of charts quite a bit as we talk about these micronutrients. They're good to get a kind of overall impression. One of the things that I am quite often asked is, can fruit substitute for vegetables? My child doesn't like vegetables, but she eats a lot of fruits. Does that do the job? And it's hard to answer that question because it's not equivalent in terms of the nutrients that are rich in fruits, but we also have to consider the other food groups as well. Okay, so you can see again, there are crossovers, but there are also some food groups that are quite rich and an excellent source of a few of these micronutrients. I really like these charts, and I just wanted to mention a few things because consumers are often concerned about preserving the vitamins in their produce. How do I make sure that I keep those vitamins so that they reach my body when I consume them? A lot has to do with temperature, air, and water, okay, because losses occur in each of those scenarios. So you need to keep fruits and vegetables at the proper temperature, and you can see that here. You don't want to prepare them till right before you're going to consume them, as far as trimming and peeling and cutting, because oxygen breaks down the vitamins faster with more surface area. You want to keep heat in cooking and water in cooking as well to a minimum. So something like a quick stir fry or minimizing the cooking time is better. Prolonged cooking actually and reheating reduces vitamin content. You don't want to throw away the liquid in which you cook the vegetable because you're throwing away any vitamins that were leached out into those liquid. And you can see here also baking soda added to vegetables to make them greener destroys a few vitamins as well. All right, so we're going to talk a bit about minerals now in an overview fashion. So let's do that. These are chemical elements, and they can't be broken down any further than they are. We call them essential minerals, of course, if dietary inadequacy results in a problem, and then addition to the diet reinstates health. We also describe them or define them in terms of how much is needed each day. There's a difference in amounts that are recommended for major trace and ultra trace minerals. There are also large differences in how much we find in the human body, with calcium far outweighing the others. Okay, so this is grams in the human body, and you can see calcium and phosphorus far outweigh the other minerals. Not that they aren't essential, because every one of them is essential. Okay, so one of the things that we get to when we talk about minerals is bioavailability. Okay, bioavailability means what is available for your body. With minerals, there's a difference between what is in the food and what is absorbed and utilized. And it gets tricky and interesting because there are a number of factors that influence that bioavailability, including age and sex and genetic variables, your nutritional status, what you're consuming in your diet, and especially in the same meal, drugs, and as part of that diet, fiber content of the diet. Zinc deficiencies in Middle Eastern populations are partly due to low bioavailability of dietary zinc because of the consumption of unleavened breads. Okay, so that is where bioavailability is the issue. Minerals are mostly absorbed in the small intestine, and we mentioned fibers. Two in particular do decrease mineral absorption quite a bit, phytic acid and oxalic acid. So high fiber diets can lower the absorption of iron and zinc. Now, I want to mention something right here. This does not mean that high fiber diets are a bad thing. It does mean if you're consuming a high fiber diet, you need to make sure that you're consuming enough of vitamins and minerals, especially minerals, because fiber can lower mineral absorption. Now, that's typically the case because typically foods that are higher in fiber are more nutrient dense, but there would be an exception, and the exception would be if you were consuming a poor diet, but just getting your fiber from a fiber supplement. In that case, this could cause problems. Vitamin C is notable for increasing iron absorption, vitamin D for calcium absorption. And one of the reasons we don't recommend, in most cases, single minerals in supplement form is because they can impair absorption of another mineral. And zinc and copper are an example of that. As far as storage, storage differs depending upon the mineral. It's easy to see that calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium and fluoride are stored in bone. Several are stored in liver and other tissues and organs as well. Okay, so let's talk about toxicities. Once again, supplements pose the biggest threat for toxicity. Okay, so it's hard to get there from foods. It is possible to get into that UL area from a highly fortified diet. At one point, several years ago, I had a student, and when he did his dietary assessment, he noticed that his iron levels were above the UL. And in his case, it came from eating a lot of fortified cereal. So that is a possibility. You want to avoid intakes above the daily value on supplement labels. So what that means is 100% would be the tops that you would want. And remember that harmful interactions with other nutrients can occur. Okay, so minerals are not lost typically from animal food processing, but they are lost from plant foods. They're not destroyed like vitamins may be, but they can be lost. They can be thrown away, as in the cases of refining of grains. And just a little side note here about Gwen. It's the fiber in the plant foods, right, that causes the problem with bioavailability. She just needs to make sure that her vegetarian diet is a well-planned one, and she should be fine. Okay, so here again, we see the minerals. Grains are packed, and you can see that here, but you find essential minerals in all of the different food groups. So quick overview, and we'll get more into this when we look at the functional chapters, which are coming up. These are all the functions that the micronutrients are involved with. So you see here enzymes, you see fluid and electrolyte balances, body defenses, bone health, energy metabolism, blood and brain health. So even though we only need little bits of these, micrograms and milligrams, specks of the nutrient daily, they are extremely important in functions that are part of our lives. As far as enzymes, coenzymes from vitamins and cofactors from minerals are essential for the action of enzymes. So vitamins and minerals are important for enzyme function. Minerals are very, very important for fluid and electrolyte balance. One of the things you probably already know, but will learn in anatomy and physiology, is that fluid is found in different compartments, and minerals are important for regulating that. Vitamins and minerals are very important, as well as phytochemicals in our body's defenses, not only antioxidants, but also our immune system as well. We'll talk about that. And you can see here, vitamin A, zinc, vitamin C, a number of phytochemicals as well. And as far as building bones, we think of calcium, but calcium does not act alone. You see there that we need vitamin D to absorb the calcium, K, vitamin K, phosphorus, magnesium, and fluoride. And energy metabolism is the breaking down of the food that we consume, the end products of digestion of that food, breaking down what's sent to the cells to provide energy to basically run our body. And we talked about this, most of that is our basal metabolism. And finally, blood and brain health, an area that I'm extremely interested in. Certainly, vitamins and minerals are important for both our blood and our brain. So these micronutrients are multitaskers. We need them as far as every aspect of our body, and deprivation can be debilitating and even deadly, by the way. Foods are generally safe, effective, and enjoyable sources, okay? And that enjoyable part is very important, okay? We can't forget when we're studying nutrition how enjoyable food is. The pleasure that we get from food consumption is at the root of this. And we need to remember that dietary supplements, though an option for filling in some gaps, should not replace regular food. And when choosing to start with a supplement, you really should have some expert advice or do some very careful research. Okay, before we get into supplements, let's talk a little bit about phytochemicals. These are plant food substances. They're typically pigments in plant foods, so they're found in very brightly colored foods, and they're responsible for colors and flavors and odors. They protect the plant, but what we now know is they also protect us. The health benefits of phytochemicals goes beyond the health benefits of the vitamins and minerals in those foods. And here is a short list. The research on phytochemicals is absolutely exciting. There are phytochemicals that we've shown reduce inflammation. Turmeric contains phytochemicals that are anti-inflammatory. There are phytochemicals that protect our DNA and seem to prevent cancer. There are phytochemicals that promote cardiovascular, eye, bone health. So very, very exciting. And around phytochemical recommendations, it's really kind of simple, because what we need to recommend to get all these amazing healthful substances is to consume a plant-based diet with loads of color generally. And you can see that here. A lot of times the handouts or the flyers for increasing phytochemicals show a rainbow of color. So adding more plant foods gets you more phytochemicals. Okay, so we're going to end by talking about dietary supplements. And let's start with the legislation that covers dietary supplements. Dietary supplements are regulated differently than prescription and over-the-counter medications. Okay, they fall under the DSHEA, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. Okay, so that's where we start. And that covers not only vitamins and minerals, but also herbals and sports supplements as well. The supplement industry is a huge one, but keep in mind that supplements can be sold without proof first that they are safe and effective. And this is different from pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals, although I am not claiming that our FDA is perfect, they do have to go through a process where they are supposed to prove they're safe and effective. For supplements, the FDA provides little regulation unless there are problems that come about. So that makes it a very much a buyer beware market, and a lot of consumers are not aware of that. Now, why do people take supplements? A variety of reasons, and some of them make more sense than others. The bullet that makes the most sense is probably the second one, okay, to fill in some nutrient gaps. You have completed a diet analysis, and we're going to study that, or you're studying that throughout this semester. What we know is sometimes, try as you might, you can't quite get to the point where you're meeting all of your recommendations. So supplements can fill in the gap. If you are deficient, they can increase energy because B vitamin deficiencies can cause you to lack energy. If you are deficient, they could possibly prevent disease. And that's kind of the theme of the day. Certainly deficiencies can be corrected with a supplement, but let's talk about that a little further. So they should be a backup to food. There's not a whole lot of evidence to support kind of everyone taking a multivitamin, although there's some research in that area. Okay, a few studies show that. But dietitians and most healthcare practitioners believe that diet should be first, eating the recommended servings of fruits and vegetables, grains, and the other food groups as well. Dietary supplements cannot cancel out the impact of an ultra-processed food diet, and they certainly cannot replace regular healthy food, okay? Now, there are groups of people, however, who may benefit, and I would like to stress it's a pretty long list when we're looking here. So if there's someone whose diet is, they just can't correct it, we can fill in the gaps, right? And then you see that here. If someone is malabsorbing nutrients, this may be helpful. Or if they take a medication that interferes with nutrient absorption. Older adults may benefit because older adults may have more problem, for instance, absorbing vitamin B12. Pregnant women need more folic acid. People who abuse alcohol. And as far as B12, again, we saw older adults and strict vegans as well. And the list goes on. Vitamin C for people who smoke, vitamin D if you don't consume milk or don't get much sunlight, vitamin E for newborns, vitamin K for people who abuse alcohol. So we can't make the blanket statement, supplements are bad. No one should take supplements. That's just not true. We can say, let's start with diet, see how closely we can get to those recommendations, and then move on from there. I really like this graphic. I think this is very, very good. So we start with food, okay? And we start with a plant-based diet, more unprocessed and lightly processed foods than ultra-processed. We can use some fortified foods when necessary. For instance, orange juice fortified with calcium, perhaps. And then if we just can't meet needs, we can consider a multivitamin and mineral supplement. Now, notice here that the first place you go, even if it's calcium and vitamin D that you're not getting enough of, is the multivitamin. And there's a reason for that. multivitamins typically are a balanced formulation with no more than 100% of the daily value for each vitamin and mineral. That would not be likely to cause any problems. Okay, moving into individual supplements is a little trickier. The one case that I do recommend an individual supplement might be vitamin D for some individuals, but very often when my female students come up short with several vitamins and minerals, iron, calcium, vitamin D, I would recommend a woman's multivitamin and mineral supplement first because it's that more balanced formulation. Now, how about which brand of supplement you should choose? So nationally recognized brand, these are some, this is wording from your textbook. Yeah, they make mistakes too. So I don't think we should stop there. We mentioned 100% of the daily value. We don't want mega doses. Taking them with or just after meals can be helpful. Definitely check out the upper levels. So the TULs, we don't want to exceed that. Now, nature-made vitamins and minerals typically have this USP seal. That's a good one because that means it has been reviewed for product strength, quality, purity, packaging, etc. Speed of dissolution, that's good. I check my supplements on consumerlab.com, which is a prescription service, meaning that you do have to pay for it. But what this does is it gives you very, very thorough reviews of all sorts of supplements and then makes recommendations as far as which brands are best, what dosages are best, etc. So it's a unbiased, evidence-based encyclopedia for supplements, which is very nice. Okay, and I think that is it, but let's, oh, not quite. The supplement label does give some important information, and you can see that there. We talked about the fact that vitamin, or you shouldn't exceed 100% of the daily value, and definitely not without talking to a physician first. Okay, so for most of us, stay at 100% or below. There's also suggested use, manufacturer. The problem with supplements is that we're counting on the company, okay, the brand, to do the right thing because no one's checking this before they hit the shelves. That's why Consumer Lab and the USP seal are very, very helpful. Okay, and now we are finished. So thank you very much.